David Carter walked into the dealership ready to finalize paperwork, dressed sharp and carrying nothing but quiet confidence. But to the manager, none of that mattered. Within minutes, David was mocked, dismissed, and shoved toward the exit, told he didn't belong there. What no one knew was that David wasn't a customer at all. He was the new owner. Before we dive in, drop your location in the comments, like this video, and subscribe if you believe dignity has no color. He was looking for a fair deal, nothing more. A routine stop at a car dealership. The kind of errand so ordinary it should have passed without notice. But the ordinary didn't last. The sharp tone of dismissal came first, then the sting of humiliation, and within moments, David Carter, 42 years old, husband, father, respected businessman, was shoved out of the showroom like an unwanted stranger. His paperwork had slipped from his hands, fluttering to the floor like scraps of something meaningless. The manager said he didn't belong there, that he was wasting their time, but David knew what it meant. To them, his clean suit didn't matter. His position didn't matter. His humanity didn't matter. All they saw was his skin. That day, a man who had spent his life building himself up found himself reduced in seconds. What no one in that dealership knew, though, was that David was more than a customer. He was the new owner. And the question that lingered in the air was this: how do you confront prejudice head-on when the very people who humiliate you are about to work under your leadership? David Carter was not a man built on theatrics or vengeance. At 42, his life was defined by discipline, service, and an unshakable belief in hard work. He lived with his wife and teenage son in a quiet neighborhood lined with trees that glowed amber in autumn and carried the smell of earth after the rain. Each morning was a ritual. Breakfast with his family, a prayer whispered under his breath, and the sound of his polished shoes against office floors. To the world, David was a man who had climbed the ladder through sheer grit. His degree earned under dim library lights, his business built from long hours and sacrifices. Yet, beneath that dignified surface lived a truth he rarely voiced, that no amount of success could erase the suspicion, the stereotypes, or the quiet sting of being seen as less. It was why he worked harder, why he demanded excellence from himself. He believed that if he carried himself with dignity, if he showed the world his worth, maybe, just maybe, he could tilt its balance a little closer to fairness. On that morning at the dealership, contract folder in hand, the sun warm against his back, he thought only of the exciting transition ahead. The air smelled faintly of gasoline from the nearby road, the lot buzzing with activity. He had no reason to expect anything more than a quick meeting and a signature. But just out of sight, tension was already brewing, and the thin veil of ordinary life was about to rip open. The escalation was sudden, sharp, and merciless. David had just stepped into the showroom, his documents neatly tucked in his folder, when the manager's voice cut through the air like a blade. "We're not interested," he snapped, waving him off without so much as a glance at the papers. Another employee smirked, arms crossed, as if to say, "You don't belong here." For a split second, David thought there must be a mistake. His mind raced. Was there confusion about his appointment? Some mix-up with scheduling? But the words that followed erased all doubt. "This isn't for people like you. Take your business elsewhere." He tried to explain, to gesture toward the documents, the ownership papers with his name written clear. But before he could finish, the manager stepped closer, hand on David's shoulder, pushing him toward the door. His briefcase slipped, papers scattering across the polished floor, ignored like litter. Customers looked up from glossy brochures, some whispering, others raising phones to capture the spectacle. To them, it was another scene in a country where scenes like this had become all too familiar. To David, it was humiliation etched into bone. Every lesson his father had given him echoed in his ears. Don't argue, don't give them a reason, live to fight another day. He complied, even as his dignity was stripped in front of watching eyes. Yet, deep inside, another thought pulsed like a drumbeat. This wasn't just about him. It was about every man who never made it past moments like these, and the question burned in his chest. Would his truth be seen? The breaking point came not with shouting or violence, but with silence. The long, heavy silence of being reduced to nothing more than a stereotype. Hours later, as he sat alone at his desk, The documents once dismissed lay spread before him like a quiet weapon. Ownership was his. The cruel twist of fate was undeniable. The very next day, David returned, not as a customer, but as the man in charge. The dealership buzzed with its usual hum of voices and ringing phones. But when the announcement was made and the staff gathered, the air shifted. Eyes darted between David and the manager who had shoved him away. Faces paled as realization sank in, and when David lifted his gaze, steady and unflinching, the room seemed to hold its breath. Here stood a man they had humiliated less than 24 hours before, and here he stood above them, not with vengeance, but with truth. He cleared his throat, his voice calm, deliberate. The papers in his hand were not just contracts, they were the weight of history, of justice quietly but firmly restored. In that instant, the dealership was no longer just a place of transactions. It became a mirror reflecting a nation's wound. And the question lingered. Would the truth spoken here echo beyond these walls, or be swallowed like so many others before it? The room inside the dealership eventually settled into an uneasy silence. However, for David Carter, the echoes of what had happened the day before still lingered like a scar beneath the surface. Ownership had shifted, yes, and authority was now his. But victory didn't erase the sting of being treated as less than human, of being dismissed not for his character or his ability, but for the color of his skin. That kind of wound cut deeper than any title deed could heal. It was the reminder that dignity should never have to be proven, that respect should not come only when power is revealed. Collins avoided his gaze after that moment, his once commanding voice reduced to stammered excuses and hollow apologies. Yet David Carter didn't respond with cruelty or vengeance. He stood tall, the very picture of dignity reclaimed, and allowed the truth to speak louder than any argument. Everyone in that room saw it. The same man who had been shoved out as though he didn't belong was now the rightful owner, the leader, the one with the power to make change. And in that moment, but the impact reached far beyond the walls of that dealership. For every employee who witnessed it, for every customer who stood frozen in that tense silence, the story would live on. They had seen what prejudice looked like up close, and they had also seen what accountability felt like when the tables turned. It wasn't just about David Carter. It was about the countless others who never got the chance to reveal the truth, who were silenced before they could be seen for who they really were. David Carter carried that weight with him. The papers in his hand symbolized ownership, but the experience symbolized something far greater, a reflection of the struggle faced by millions who walk into rooms where they're doubted, dismissed, or demeaned before they're even given a chance. His story was not an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger reality that continues to shape lives every single day. He knew that what happened to him could just as easily happen again to someone else, in a store, in an office, on a street corner, or at a traffic stop. And unlike him, many wouldn't have the documents or the power to change the ending. Many wouldn't walk away with victory. They would only walk away with scars. That truth stayed with him, heavy, unshakable, and painfully real. And so, while the dealership changed hands, David Carter made a promise to himself. Ownership was not the end goal. The true purpose was to create an environment where dignity wasn't a privilege, but a standard, where no one would be turned away for who they were, where the next person walking through those doors would be seen for their worth, not their skin. This story doesn't just belong to David Carter. It belongs to every person who has ever been judged before being heard, to every voice silenced by prejudice, to every dream crushed under the weight of discrimination. It is a mirror reflecting the world we live in, asking us to confront the uncomfortable truth. How many more stories like this must unfold before change truly takes root? David Carter walked out of that dealership not just as an owner, but as a reminder that racism thrives not just in violent headlines, but in everyday moments of dismissal and disrespect. A reminder that silence allows injustice to continue, and a reminder that sometimes justice arrives quietly, with a name on a deed, a shift in power, and the undeniable truth that equality is not negotiable. But the question that lingers is one we must all answer. How many more lives have to be tested? How many more hearts broken before respect becomes the default? Before dignity is given without condition? Before humanity is valued without hesitation? That is the challenge David Carter's story leaves behind. Not just to remember, not just to feel outrage, but to act, to speak, to share, to stand, to demand better. Because this is not just his story, it is our story. It is the world's story. And it will keep repeating until enough voices rise to change it. So, I'll leave you with this. When the next moment comes, when you see someone dismissed, demeaned, or denied, what role will you play? Will you stay silent, or will you stand